Your 3-minute warning. Let's see. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Harper Distinguished Speaker Series hosted by the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. I'm Rachel Walsh, Interim Dean of the College, and better known as CAUS. The Harper Distinguished Speaker Series is made possible by the Heber Harper Humanities Distinguished Lectureship Endowment, established through the generous gift from former DU Chancellor Heber Harper. This series brings an innovative leader from the humanities and liberal arts to the University of Denver each year. We are delighted to welcome alumni, members of the Denver community, colleagues, and students from across campus to hear from leading scholars and participate in meaningful conversations that shape our world. Tonight, we are especially pleased to acknowledge the Center for Immigration Policy and Research, better known as CIPR, at the University of Denver, a hub for research, teaching, policy, and community engagement focused on migration. Through the leadership of co-directors Dr. Lisa Martinez, Professor of Sociology at the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Dr. Rebecca Galemba, Professor of Anthropology at the Korbel School of International Studies, CIPR brings together faculty experts and provides interdisciplinary opportunities for students and fosters partnerships with organizations working at the local, national, and global levels. Their work in immigration policy, labor law, and education continues to shape critical discussions, including the one we are about to have this evening. Tonight, we are honored to present Dr. Jason De León as our distinguished Harper Lecture speaker. Thank you to the CAUS elected faculty committee that selected Dr. De León as the speaker for this evening, for his outstanding research and public work. Jason received his undergraduate degree in anthropology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and his master's and PhD in anthropology at Penn State University. Dr. De León's studies and research include theories of violence, materiality, Latin American migration, photoethnography, forensic science, and archaeology of the contemporary. He is the director of the Costin Institute of Archaeology, Lloyd E. Costin Endowed Chair of Archaeology, and a professor of anthropology and Chicano, and Central American Studies at UCLA. Additionally, he serves as the executive director of the Undocumented Migration Project, UMP, Inc., a nonprofit research, arts, and education collective that seeks to raise awareness about migration issues globally. Dr. De León is the author of 2 award-winning books, The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying in the Migrant Trail, and Soldiers and Kings, Survival and Hope in the World of Human Smuggling, the latter of which won the 2024 National Book Award for Nonfiction. Do it again, yes. And we can also whoop it up for the fact that he also was a 2017 MacArthur Foundation Fellow. So pretty impressive. His groundbreaking research provides the foundation for tonight's critical and timely discussion surrounding migration between the US-Mexico border, anti-illegal immigration efforts passed jointly by the Mexican and US governments in the early to mid-2010s, and the complex relationship that has emerged between transnational gangs, the human smuggling industry, and migrant desires for safety and well-being. Dr. De León, we are honored to have you here, and please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you so much for that very warm and generous introduction. I often don't know who that person is that was being described, but I'm happy to be here. I was telling some students this morning, you know, that the MacArthur Foundation, they sometimes refer to as the Genius Grant, and the morning that that the announcement was made, I was at a hotel in Madison, Wisconsin, getting ready to give a talk, and I somehow managed to lock myself out of my hotel room in like my weird, like kind of like raggedy pajamas, and had to like walk downstairs all barefoot and looking probably super disheveled to explain why they should let me back in without an ID. And so I always like to say that that was my first official act as a genius, was to lock myself out of a hotel room. But you know, I'm very, very excited to be here, and I'm going to work very hard to keep this to 45 minutes. It's been a little bit difficult for me lately because it's like I've been giving a lot of talks for the last probably 6-7 months, and every week that sometimes it's like 3 or 4 times a month, and I feel like every time I go up to give a talk, some new catastrophe has happened, and I'm like trying to figure out how to respond. So I keep adding slides and not taking away, but I added a new one today, and we're going to see if we can if I can still keep this to 45. So I'm going to try. But I wanted to start with a thing that we cut out of Soldiers and Kings because my editor and my agent felt like it wasn't relevant anymore. You know, I wanted to write some about this moment where I had gone to a Trump rally in 2016 in Michigan, and they said, it's 2023, it's 2024, you know, we're beyond that now. You know, this is kind of old news, and so I've resuscitated this B-side that got cut from the book, and maybe if they do a second edition, we bring this back in. So let's time travel a little bit back to 2016 to Warren, Michigan. I'm unsure what size crowd Trump is going to draw in here today, so I get to the rally an hour and a half early. The Macomb Community College parking lot is a desert. There's so much space that 2 rednecks and pickup trucks are doing donuts in the March snow right in front of the auditorium. I park literally 5 feet from the entrance. I was hoping for more action outside, maybe some college-age protesters or a snaking line of pasty Michiganders in MAGA hats and American flag shirts dying to get in to see the Donald. The only interesting thing out front are 2 black men on the sidewalk peddling T-shirts that read, quote, "Trump that bitch," and, quote, "Trump, finally someone with balls." Here's one of those happy customer. These 2 black men out front might be the only 2 black people at this entire rally. I tell myself that there's no line to get in because this candidate is a joke, a middle America political fantasy with a short shelf life. I think to myself that no rational or sane person would take seriously a candidate who is blatantly a liar, a misogynist, a racist, now a convicted felon, as Donald J. Trump. This is what I tell myself to maintain my own delusion about what America is. They frisk us as we pass through the metal detector before we enter the small gymnasium. At the entrance, I notice that more than half of the security detail are long-haired bikers in black leather vests. I get close and look at one of them, and I can see that he's got a keychain dangling off his waist that says SS on it. I mean, these are literal Nazis running security. Trump has yet to win the Republican nomination on this day, so it's mostly the lunatic fringe crowd and the small but growing number of closeted, and I would say not so closeted, racists who took a day off from the bank and the dental hygienist's office to come here the only politician willing to speak his mind and tell the truth about rape-crazed immigrants, loser war heroes, and the DC swamp that needs a good draining. A white lady in a safari print t-shirt walks by and takes my picture with her iPad. I follow her eyes, and I notice that she's photographing the few people of color in the audience, apparently making a record of those that she anticipates will cause problems. And some of them do. I'm standing with Lalo, my Mexican collaborator, who I dragged along with me because I thought it would be funny. We jokingly bought him a Trump beanie outside in hopes that it would act as camouflage, and it actually does work. He does not take his picture. And then, of course, years later, there'd be many Latinos wearing Trump gear, unironically. She doesn't take his picture, but her intuition eventually proves correct because almost every person of color and several young white people will later be forcibly removed after they begin screaming and acting disruptive during the first part of this rally. It feels like I'm still at this rally now, but it's no longer funny and it's no longer fringe, right? And I ask myself, am I going to be sitting idly by in this rally now? Or am I going to be this young person disrupting? Are we going to just watch this unfold, or are we going to say something about what is happening to this country? Trump is, of course, late coming out, which gives me plenty of time to walk around the half-filled gymnasium to take photos. I would be surprised if there are maybe 600 people in the entire place, even if you include the dozens of reporters who are at the back of the room. The sparse attendance at this point gives me hope that this is all a bad joke, a story that I can later tell at parties about the time I went to a white power rally. The waiting drags on. The event organizers repeatedly start teasing an entrance by playing really terrible inspirational rock from the 1980s. I don't remember at this point if he was still playing Born in the USA, thinking this was a pro-America song. Clearly not. These folks don't listen to the lyrics, or like Keep on Rockin' in the Free World, also not a pro-America song, right? But the crowd starts getting antsy. They start chanting "Build a Wall." Put my timer on there. Okay, they start building a wall for several minutes, and I keep thinking to myself, how can they not know that this wall is a farce? It is a smokescreen. It is a false promise. He finally appears. He comes out and he says, okay, thank you, so good to be here. I love you all. People start chanting USA. And he says, this is an amazing crowd. We have thousands of people outside trying to get in. He said, the fire marshal was very nice to us. We're stacked right into the corners. I look around and we're obviously not stacked to the corners. He says, I thanked the fire marshal, but you know what? There are 2,000 or 3,000 people outside waiting to get in. And all I can think about are these two black guys outside selling t-shirts. He says, these people are going to have to go home. Does anyone here want to give up their ticket? People, no. And it's like, you know, it's like the emperor has no clothes on, right? He is lying, and the crowd is going along with it. He says, we're going to have fun today, though. We're going to build a wall. We're going to make Mexico build a wall. And every time Vicente Fox talks shit to me, I'm going to make that wall go higher and higher. Of course, that wall has not been built. Of course, Mexico has not been paying for any of this stuff. This is all part of this fantasy that keeps going on and on and on and on. I tell myself that this crowd craves a wall because the truth about immigration, about their lost jobs, about why they can't make ends meet on $9.25 an hour is too much to bear. Like the millions of people on the southern side of the border dying to come to this country, this crowd also wants the elusive American dream. They do not want to hear about the destructive nature of capitalism. They do not want to know who is actually invested in keeping them angry at other poor people. We just don't want this, right? We don't want to know where the money is actually going. We want to hear about how this person is going to stop Mexicans from stealing their jobs, right? And taking these Trump kept saying, we're gonna bring these factories back and stop Mexico from stealing your jobs, as if Mexico is this economic powerhouse that says, give us your auto factories, right? We're taking them with us, right? I mean, but people, they want to believe that. And so they want to hear horror stories about how guys with face tattoos and machetes are gonna murder them in their suburban bedrooms unless we fortify the border. This agitated crowd keeps chanting, build a wall, as they construct their own fantasies about America's future and their own. And I tell myself, I said, look, at the time, I brought this Mexican buddy with me as a way to, it felt like a joke. But no one is joking now as we swing to the hard right globally. Everywhere this is not an American problem. I was just in Scotland, and it's bleak there. I was just in Kentucky. It's bleak there. I talked to friends in Italy. Brazil. This is happening. This is happening everywhere. And we are not joking anymore as we watch this swing happen, as we watch the world burn, as we watch our economy tank, the global economy tank, and we look at the inequalities of capitalism grow daily. This forces me to consider something that's like the day after the election this year. I woke up and I said to myself, how could this be? And then I had to remind myself. I said, hey, dumbass, remember when you wrote a book about how the federal government kills migrants on a daily basis? Of course this is a country founded on patriarchy, genocide, land theft, misogyny, racism. So of course this is who we are. And I have to tell myself now, I said, I have to consider three Americas. There's the one that I was taught about American dreams, about meritocracy. There's the one that I have experienced as a person of color. There is the one that I have studied as a student of history, where I see that inequality, nepotism, corruption, misogyny, racism, all the isms, right, discrimination, these are the things that make up this country today. And then there is a country that I hope for into the future. And I have to be thinking about those three things now simultaneously as they fight with one another. And I was taught to believe that America is great and getting better. And so now being told that by white supremacists who have always been in the room, well, Donald Trump is not the problem. He's just the latest manifestation of white supremacy, that we want to go back to this great America that doesn't include me, right? It doesn't include people of color, doesn't include people from the LGBTQ community, doesn't include indigenous people, right? That we want to go back to make America great when white supremacy was supreme. And it's here now. It's always been here. And these are the things I think that we have to be cognizant of and really understanding today as part of America, and we have to grapple with this. In 2016, I think people were thinking about this as like a white issue, and I think it's way more complicated now, and the Latino vote has really made that clear. Although I do think we're watching this daily unfold as people are starting to have some buyer's remorse about voting for Trump. It's unfortunate that we have to experience the brutality directly before we start to be concerned with it. And I remember I had a student in the fall who said, "I'm not voting this time because it doesn't matter. These things don't affect me." And someone turned to them and said, "Well, they're going to start to affect you and affect many people that you care about." And so this is coming, and we're starting to see these coalitions growing, and that gives me hope. But it's really unfortunate that we can't just empathize with other folks and vote with conscience. That it has to directly impact us first before we start to care about these things. We need to get beyond that. And I'm a liberal. I'm a bleeding heart. Obviously, but also, I'm just watching these things as a student of history and going, this is not good. This, like fascism, white supremacy, these aren't just like liberal buzzwords that live in the past. This is like here. It is here. It is here. It is here. So I think we need to ring the alarm and really be figuring out who we are as individuals, as a country, and what role we're going to play to help make this a better world for all. And so I wanted to get that out of the way, because that's at the core of so much of what I've tried to understand about the world and tried to do But I want to connect this now to immigration. And I'll just say before I get into talking about smuggling, smugglers love Donald Trump because they love all the bluster and they know that they can raise their prices even though nothing has fundamentally changed at the US-Mexico border. And they also know that no matter what we do to migrants at the border, we kill them, we put them into prison, we deport them, that is not going to stop the climate change that has forced people to leave their homes, that is not going to stop the brutality of poverty that they are experiencing on a daily basis. And so smuggling will outlast this administration, and we need to really be thinking about these problems as a global issue that cannot be solved at the US-Mexico border. But let's take that now. Maybe my ranting is over for a little bit, and I want to send us now to Honduras, to San Pedro Sula, and introduce you at least to a couple of people. And so I'll begin with a story about a young man named Roberto. Roberto's murder, it does not warrant much attention, and that's not surprising at all in a place like Honduras, where homicide has become woven into the fabric of daily life. Still, a local newspaper in San Pedro Sula manages to give him a couple of sentences, although they get his first name wrong when they write it. They call him Jose. His first name was Juan. Juan Roberto Paredes. He died Friday night at Mario Rivas Hospital. Family members reported that he had tried to travel mojado illegally to the United States, but in Chiapas, Mexico, was stabbed during an assault and admitted to a hospital. After his discharge, he returned to Honduras, where after a few days his condition worsened, and he was brought back to Rivas Hospital, where he died after several days. Now, the story gets most of the basic details right. Roberto was in Mexico illegally when he was stabbed. He later died from his wounds in Honduras. But he wasn't a migrant headed to the United States, at least not anymore. He'd given up that fantasy a while ago, and for the past few years had been living as a street urchin, making a little money, guiding his fellow Hondurans on the Mexican tracks as they made their way north toward the American dream. What he did for a modest living goes by many names in English and in Spanish: coyote, smuggler, pollero, pasador. These are interchangeable terms that refer to someone who's paid to help people get across a geopolitical boundary while avoiding detection. Now, Roberto, like many in his situation in Mexico, liked to call himself a guide, a guia. And this is a designation that has potentially less some negative semantic baggage, and I think it's one that more directly reflects the work. He is a service provider. He is the one that you follow. He is the one who could potentially lead you through danger. What you cannot call Roberto is a human trafficker. People who are trafficked have that happen against their will, usually through force, fraud, or coercion. The folks that he has smuggled or had smuggled in his life were willing participants who sought him out and paid him for their services. Say it one more time. Human smuggler and human trafficker are very different things. And this is often a concept difficult for us to understand because we use them interchangeably, and it's not correct. And I'll never forget, I was doing an interview once on some radio show, and I said, this is a book about smuggling, and I really went to great detail to clarify that. And then the guy goes, okay, next we're talking with Jason DeLeon about his new book on human trafficking. And I was like, I need to wear a shirt that says this, because we need to think about smuggling. It is a service that is provided to folks, and it's part of this much larger, complicated economic system. Now, you don't have to be a soothsayer to get the simple point that if you look at the news, you can see that we're in bad shape as a society. Worldwide migration crisis is what we are experiencing, is what we are giving to the next generation, where poverty, violence, political instability, climate change, these things are forcing millions of people to leave their homes every year in search of a better life. Now, of course, if you couple this with rising sea levels, increased drought, these environmental monsters, these super hurricanes that are battering places like Honduras, you see that it's about to get a lot worse for everybody. Of course, in the global north, we have these very tone-deaf responses. And if Kamala Harris was in the White House right now too, I'd be saying many of the same things I'm saying right now. Nobody's hands are clean. And I love it when people say stupid shit like, oh, what do you have? Do you have a message for migrants? Yep, don't come. We're all full here. And I had someone ask me that once. What do you think about the statement that the vice president said to a bunch of folks in Guatemala? I said, do you think if that worked, We wouldn't have said that a long time ago. I mean, this is just like these are the most tone deaf kind of things. And so, but this is us. And we pour money into deportation industrial complexes, which is growing now, right? As we mass deport people, um, citizen and non-citizen alike, seemingly. We build barricades. We fire tear gas at mothers holding their babies. We put children in cages. We increasingly deny due process to asylum seekers, and not even to asylum seekers, to American citizens, right? The story recently about this guy in Phoenix who spent 11 days in detention. It's a U.S. citizen. Took him 11 days to prove that he was a U.S. citizen, and for them to let him out. This is where we're at. And, but it's feeling like we are in this dystopian kind of future now, or present. But I will say that human mobility cannot be stopped. Like as an anthropologist, I can tell you that our ability to survive as a species has relied on our ability to move across the landscape in search of new places. And so you cannot stop that at all. So here we are. We're beating people back at our borders. It's starting to look like a science fiction movie, like a shot out of the film Children of Men. And as that's happening, of course, migration is increasing, and so is the need for smuggling. The smuggling industry has ballooned, and we are now starting to pay a lot more attention to it. And I say this now, that this is only going to be more and more important as we move into the future, because more and more parts of our planet are becoming less livable. And so as we ramp up security, migrants now need a new type of smuggler who can get them through this increasingly violent world of migration. This means you got to hire someone who can get you through this dangerous gauntlet. And it's a gauntlet characterized by extreme environments, deserts, oceans, jungles, transnational gangs, drug cartels, law enforcement who are trying to profit from this movement, who are trying to stop people, impede the journey. And that's really what this project is largely about. And these days, the smugglers, these low-level smugglers that I spend a lot of time with doing this dirty work, they have a lot in common with their clients. They are all trying to escape poverty and the unlivable places that they once called home. This kid, Roberto, the guia, he was a tiny cog in this behemoth global economy of human smuggling. The media often portrays people like him as the, quote, bad guys who prey on the innocent. But the story is, of course, never that simple. Arrest and deportation, robbery by law enforcement, or kidnapping, extortion, murder at the hands of transnational gangs. These are all the things that migrants have to now deal with. And so many have come to see the labor of someone like Roberto as necessary and potentially even life-saving. That isn't to say that smugglers can't also be thieves, traffickers, murderers, and rapists. They can be all those things and then some, which becomes apparent as the story unfolds both today and in this book. But just keep in mind, people go to a smuggler because they give them the benefit of the doubt that no matter what happens, they will eventually get to their final destination, even if it involves more hardship and shelling out more cash than was initially agreed upon. And now all of these migrants who are contracting smugglers, they've heard terrible stories about smugglers, and many of them have had their own kind of bad experiences. But they still make these contracts in good faith with the hopes that these folks will protect them and eventually get them to where they want to go, and not rob them, sell them into slavery, or abandon them in the jungle, desert, or the back of a semi-truck. Now, we only hear about those things, we only really hear about smugglers when something really bad happens, and bad things do happen often. But more often than not, people get to where they want to go. I would say it's like 90% of the time the system functions. And there are just enough, quote, good smugglers in the world for this economy to keep moving. If it didn't, this thing would cease to exist. Now, when we talk about them, or when we represent them in popular media, these folks are often portrayed as these like pot-bellied Latinos with silver teeth and slick hair. They reek of cologne. They drive shiny trucks that are bought with the hard-earned money of these desperate migrants. But Roberto and many of the folks that I work with defy these stereotypes. He was a skinny, banged-up kid from Honduras who was often homeless and living hand to mouth. He rarely had more than $20 to his name and was often more desperate than his clients. He knew how to guide people on the train tracks and through the jungle because he came of age in those dreadful places. but he never saw huge piles of money. He never got to drive a car. He was not a kingpin or someone who called the shots. There was nothing glamorous about his lifestyle or his brutally short existence. Now, his modest grave is marked by a wrought iron. Can I turn my microphone on? Is that going to be weird now? Is it too loud? Okay. I was just like, I forgot. I'm wearing this microphone. It's not on. His grave is marked by an iron plaque that bears his name, his birthday, and his date of death. The engraver had one job, was to get these details right, and even that he couldn't get right, so they get his last day on earth incorrect. But people would say that he doesn't even matter. To most folks, Roberto is a nobody, just another young man from Honduras with a history of substance abuse and violent behavior. Someone destined for an early grave, and cemeteries across Latin America are full of skeletons of people just like him. Children born into generational poverty whose bleak futures are predetermined before they can speak. Kids who live fast and die fast because those are often the only choices that they are given. Roberto is one of those kids, but he is not a nobody. He is a young person with dreams and aspirations who carries hope with him until the very end. He is important enough that people will wail at his funeral and pray for his soul. Someone will scratch "I love you" in the wet concrete poured over the top of his tomb. I will come to know him as a soldier trying to survive on the train tracks in Mexico. He confides in me that he wants to get out of the smuggling game. It's out of control. Death is breathing down his neck. He wants to run away and invent a new life for himself that doesn't include guns or knives or desperate people doing desperate things. But that is not how the story ends, like for many of the young folks that I ended up working with. As I sit on his grave in rural Honduras, I think about the lush countryside. It's this awe-inspiring landscape that holds no future for so many people who must head north and roll the dice. These are migrants who will follow the train tracks across Mexico and pray that whatever is waiting for them at the end of the line is better than the cruel hardships and the early death that they're running from. This book project is about Roberto and others like him who get caught up in the smuggling game. And in Soldiers and Kings, I explore the lives of smugglers and their intimate relationships with death. Destitute men and women who find themselves trapped in a world of violence and fast money while in search of hope. It's a world of guias, of guides, who have no one to lead them to safety except maybe themselves. So today's talk will be a brief and admittedly unsatisfactory journey down those train tracks. But I find that people lose interest when I try to just read 400 pages of text. So we're going to just give you some snapshots here. And so much of what I'm talking about today comes from this book, or all of what I'm talking about today comes from this book, Project Soldiers and Kings, which is based on a long-term ethnographic study that began in 2015 and involved also a significant amount of photography, both by myself and my collaborator, Michael Wells. The book itself focuses on about 6 individuals whose lives intersect in different ways. And I'm introduce you to just 2 folks today, someone that I call Jasmine and someone that I call Chino. And the book is about smuggling and about their lives, but I think it's really also, more importantly, about poverty and about race and about capitalism and climate change and the very difficult decisions that people have to make when they are in these predicaments. I think part of it, too, by the time the book was done, it felt like I was also trying to explain to people the difficulties of doing ethnography as a social scientist who works with human subjects, and the difficulties of writing someone else's experiences. And I think I also, because this book is written for a trade audience, I wanted people to understand what anthropology is and how it is different from something like journalism. And so I use this phrase that comes from the anthropological literature of like deep hanging out, which the New York Times just thought I was being cute and see, we told you they don't actually do any work, they just hang out, And as I was telling students this morning, my wife and I would joke that this was my drink beer and hang out on the train tracks project, because I did a lot of that. And I gamed the system by figuring out how to get paid to hang out on the train tracks and drink beer and just talk shit with a bunch of folks. But really, for me, the deep hanging out thing is like this intense time commitment and this intense personal commitment to being with these folks, to really understand their lives in as many ways as I possibly can through this long-term analysis. And I get this question a lot, so I just wanted to kind of say this. My first project really focused on migrants and migrant death. And I wanted to, and I talked about this exhibition this morning. So in many different ways, I've tried to show the public that thousands of people have died crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. They die on a daily basis. And so that was part of a big part of even the ongoing work. But smuggling was always also present, and I just felt like we didn't really understand it, despite the fact that it was the elephant in the room. Like, you cannot talk about undocumented migration without talking about smuggling. And so I wanted to find a way to tell a different kind of story about migration. And I knew that if I started writing about the bad guys, that it would force me to think about this in a different way, which it really did. And so before I introduce you to some of these folks, just kind of quickly, situated historically. This project began in 2015, right on the cusp of major immigration changes that were happening under the Obama administration. And basically, you might remember back in 2014, where suddenly the American public was like, who are all these kids showing up at the US-Mexico border? Why are they in Mylar blankets and they're in detention centers? And they're coming from this place called Honduras. What part of Mexico is that in, right? You know, we don't know about, I mean, our knowledge of Central America in this country is so poor, and Honduras is a crucial part of American history that oftentimes gets ignored. But so Obama comes out and says, don't worry, those kids are gone. We've secured the US-Mexico border. We didn't do anything at the border that was different. All we did was start to employ Mexico to stop migrants before they got to our border. We've been doing this now in Panama. We're doing it all over the place. And so this program called Plan Frontera Sur, Programa Frontera Sur, was a Mexican initiative funded by the U.S. and supported by the U.S. to stop people from coming to the United States, stop them to get to the border by trying to weaponize Mexico against them. And it raised the costs of smuggling. It made it more difficult to get across Mexico. It used to take a couple of weeks to do it. Now it could take you a month to get out of the southern part of the country. And it made everything more difficult. And so it was in this context that they began this project, right when a new need for smugglers was arising. And I would argue that this project really is about showing how these policies that started under Obama were building off of policies that started under Bill Clinton, and it's really trying to move the US-Mexico border farther and farther south so that we can outsource the brutality to other countries and to other environments. And so much of this project took place along the Guatemala-Mexico border, and we're going to meet some of these places. And a big chunk of the book takes place in a place called Pacalna. And if you know anything about archaeology in Mexico or Mesoamerica, there's a very famous archaeological site called Palenque, which is about 8 kilometers from this place called Pacalna. And the Maya train that the president of Mexico, the former president of Mexico, was responsible for building, it ends in this archaeological site of Palenque, which is an amazing World Heritage site. But 8 kilometers away, literally the other side of the tracks, is this place called Pacalna, which is a major hub for migrants and drug trafficking. When I first started working there, I made the mistake of Googling Pacalna, and just the pictures that came up, I was like, oh my God, like, are we really going there? Is this what we're doing now? It is a difficult, dangerous place, and I ended up spending many, many years there trying to understand it, but it's right next to this tourist trap. So let's go there for a minute, and I'll introduce you to 2 folks today. The first person I want you to meet is a kid named Chino. And so here we are, we're in the jungles. The lead train lurches 50 feet forward, stops, reverses, and slams hard into the car behind it. Grinding metal and screeching engine brakes compete with roosters and tropical birds. The train heaves forward and once again reverses and slams backward. Keeps repeating this process, adding more rail cars each time. Chino is 15 feet above us. He is stoned out of his mind and giggling as he leaps from one car to another. He looks like a third world Peter Pan in knockoff Crocs, and he's dancing for this audience of locals, migrants, and me. He's hamming it up, he's waving and grinning, and then he's sprinting across these moving cars in a matter of seconds. He stops just at the edge of this car and then doubles back, mimicking the rhythm of this train. A couple of times, I think he's going to go too far over the edge, and he'll go flying down to the bottom of the tracks and split his head open or worse. It's a dangerous, stupid, and entertainingly juvenile game. It allows him to show off for this crowd and remind people that he is crazy as hell. And when you're looking for a smuggler, you want someone that's crazy as hell who's going to be able to do all the dirty work that's going to be required to get you through this gauntlet. Now, as I'm there, I remember myself doing equally dangerous and irresponsible things to entertain my friends. And, it's funny sitting in my office at UCLA and thinking about my many wonderful college years in Westwood that I spent dangling from a third-story roof, drunk and high on Vicodin, putting a half stick of dynamite in my mouth while sitting on the couch and accidentally lighting the fuse while pretending that it's a cigar, pushing a 500-pound dumpster down a steep hill and then running in front of it to recreate a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. When I was in college, I never drunkenly ran across the top of a moving train, and many people would argue it's probably because I did not have access to a moving train. Now, on the surface, my shenanigans were mischievous at best and irresponsibly dangerous at worst. At the time, I thought of my behavior as simply the jackass things that young people do for kicks, shit to make people laugh, which they often did. Deep down, though, I was also trying to fill this deep hollowness that lived inside of me, a darkness that would manifest itself in bouts of crippling depression, intense feelings of isolation and rage, and a playful death wish that loomed over my teenage years and really into my late 20s. Over the years, people have asked me, how could you spend so much time with smugglers whose lives are dominated by risk and creeping demise? And I would say it's partly because it feels strangely familiar. I don't know what it's like to rob or kill someone, but I know what it's like to want to live fast and die. For many years, it felt like the hints of death were the only things that could make me feel alive. This is probably one of the reasons why I get along so well with Chino. We are long-lost kin, bonded by childhood trauma and long histories of dangerous self-medicating and self-harm. I see something of my adolescent self in his youthful recklessness, in his embrace of death, a life where death is something to be taunted and almost welcomed. The death wish that I have had to overcome, my own lifelong struggles with complex PTSD and depression, give me some privileged insight into his worldview, and I think in many of the other young people, young men that I read about in this world of smuggling. As I watch him foolishly play on top of this moving train, I think about a cynical line from Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, when Addie, the matriarch of the Bundren family, from her grave says, quote, "The reason for living was to get ready to stay dead a long time." But maybe I think, what if the reason for dying is to know that you were once alive? It takes some coaxing, but he finally comes down from the top of this train. We shelter on the side of the train tracks and pretend that the heat's not smothering us. He picks up a stick and he starts sketching out a map for me in the dirt. Names of towns are rattled off like a poem. Tapachula, Benamerito, Palenque, Corozal, Ixtepec, Tierra Blanca, Tenosique, Lecheria, Salto de Agua, Coatzacoalcos. This uneducated young man has an advanced degree in Mexican geography. He knows places to avoid, places where a church might open its doors, places where teenagers with machetes and no patience collect $100 head taxes. This place out here is a knowledge game. Survival out here is a knowledge game with a very, very steep learning curve. I start talking to Chino about his life. He says, man, I spent a lot of time on the train coming and going. Sometimes they grab you here and they send you back to Honduras. He said, but you get smarter. You go around that place next time. He's like, you just keep getting smarter and smarter. Immigration gets tougher and we invent new routes. He says, I said, how many times have you tried to cross Mexico? He says, 5 times. I got all the way to Laredo, Texas. I said, well, they catch you crossing the border? He said, no, man, I got to cross. I ended up living in a tree. He says, I found some plywood and I built my little house up there. I would stay up there at night smoking my cigarettes. He says, Chino was up there in his little tree house. Chino loves to talk about himself in the third person. He says, I spent like 8 days sleeping in a fucking tree. He said, immigration would show up looking for me, but they couldn't see Chino up in his tree house. He goes, and then they caught Chino coming out of a 7-Eleven, he tells me. He says, they were watching Chino as he left, and they knew that I was that I was undocumented. He said, I told them that I was the local, but they didn't believe it. And Chino tries to convince me that he can pass for Mexican, despite the fact that he has the thickest Honduran accent you've ever heard. He's wearing a belt buckle that has the Honduran flag on it. He's got a wallet that has a Honduran flag on it. He has a tattoo of 5 stars on one arm for the Honduran flag, and he has the word catracho, which is slang for Honduran, tattooed in huge letters on his arm. So I'm like, dude, we got to work on this Mexican disguise here. But I says to him, how long were you in the U.S.? And he says, well, I was there for like a month. He said, but the problem is you cross the border and then what? He's like, I had no place to go. You end up on the streets. And so many of these guys who end up becoming smugglers leave in the middle of the night because they're being persecuted by gangs with no plan, with no one to receive them on the other end. And so they get to the U.S. and it's just a disaster. So they have to go back to Mexico where they end up in this kind of perpetual motion. And, he says, I left when I was 16 because things were too rough in the house. There's no food, there's no money. I did not want to be an economic burden. And now I find myself stuck in motion here in Mexico. He keeps sketching out a map for me in the dirt. It shows the border to Guatemala to the south. It shows Mexico City and Laredo to the north. This map that he draws me covers thousands of square miles. Over the years, growing up on the train tracks, he has come to know dozens of cities and towns and villages. But his view of them is tethered to the tracks. He never gets to see all that these places have to offer. It's like he's looking at the world through storefront windows. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to one more person, and then we'll bring them together. Jesmyn, who I named after my favorite author, Jesmyn Ward. Just as a little on the side. Although when I emailed Jesmyn Ward and said, would you please blurb my book, I even named a character after you, she never wrote me back. So it's fine. It's fine. But I was a little sad. But I love both Jesmyns that we're going to meet right here. Okay. A metallic groan signals an iron monster emerging from the forest. With an ancient machine gun across his chest, the guard glares down at us from the bow of this train like a figurehead trying to ward off evil spirits on the tracks. Chino leans in and looks down the tracks towards Pacalna. The train comes within just a few feet of his head. He turns and grins, and then he passes Jesmyn a smoking blunt. She takes several deliberate hits and smirks as dagger-shaped smoke escapes from her mouth and disappears into the jungle like a fleeing premonition. She's wearing a t-shirt that says Heartbreaker on it, and in her quiet way, she seems out of place among this company of petty smugglers and low-budget hustlers. She's barely 20 years old and barely 5'2". She doesn't intimidate, but it's clear that she holds her own. Her dark eyes coolly take stock of everyone and everything around her. These men with their peach fuzz jawlines and their bad attitudes, they don't impress her much. Their scarred and tattooed flesh, there's these dark-skinned road maps marking pain, adventure, and dumb luck. If you look closely amongst this group of young men, you'll see things like poorly repaired bullet wounds peeking out from underneath shirt collars. You can see a bare arm showing off a pair of crudely drawn praying hands in blue-black ink, asking for forgiveness. You can see the ghosts of machete and knife blades walking across people's arms and legs. These birthmarks of violence that these men carry speak 1,000 truths about living through and with trauma, experiences that Jesmyn herself has come to know as quotidian. And in the book, I spend a lot of time on her backstory and her childhood and leading up to this moment that has brought her to the jungle. At this point, she's only been in Pacalna a couple of days. She's worked her way up from Guatemala with a group of migrants and smugglers that she ran into at the border with Mexico. This includes Chino. He had gone south with his boss, a guy that they were calling Shadow, to transport several Honduran women north. Jesmyn tags along with Chino because he promises her safe passage for at least a few hundred kilometers. It helps that she thinks that he's good looking. And I remember later asking her, I said, weren't you afraid to be out there? And she looks at me and she says, I'm from the most dangerous neighborhood in San Pedro Sula. Mexico's like a vacation to me. She's like, I'm not afraid of any of these people. And I was like, well, okay, well, I'm glad someone wasn't afraid because I sure as hell was. She's just a really kind of a cool, she's a very tough young woman. And we're here in Pacalna, and it's only supposed to be temporary. She's only supposed to be there for, as she's making her way north to the United States. Instead, she ends up getting stranded in the jungle because she's out of money. And many of these folks have to pay for the trip in increments. And so you leave Honduras with $200, that gets you into Chiapas, and now you got to wait till family can wire you another couple $100. Maybe you take a job under the table working to keep paying the next part of the trip. So she falls in with Chino and this group of smugglers waiting for the next moment to move. And she's tough as nails and does not take anything from anyone. And she, in many ways, I really wanted to write about her because her story just impacted me so much and moved me so much, but also because she really defies oftentimes the stereotypes about migrant women on the trail. She's not meek. She does not cower. She's also not naive. She understands that the migrant trail for women is a brutal place where they're subject to much higher rates of murder, rape, kidnapping, extortion, and all these things. And so she is mentally prepared for this and physically trying to convey a certain toughness as a survival mechanism. But she was always there to remind me that she does not need male protection, that she can definitely handle herself, and that she has fallen in with Chino mostly because she thinks he's good looking, and then it now ends up blossoming into a relationship. It's like in the book, the two of the kind of big stories are their backstories and leading up to the moment where they meet, and then fall in love. And so I wanted to just sort of end today with this moment where they're together trying to make an important decision about what's coming next. So they're looking pretty rough on this morning out in the jungle. She's been wearing the same clothes for several days. She's got dark circles under her eyes that really signal that they've been sleeping pretty rough near the train tracks. We're in the jungle, and so you're hearing all of this chirping birds in this jungle air. And Pakalna, which is normally not a very peaceful place because everybody's looking behind their back, for this brief moment that we're together this early morning, it feels calm. Except when that train clanks and adds another train car, and you're reminded that you're next to this beast that's known for killing migrants and taking people's arms and legs when they fall off of it. On this particular morning, Chino is super talkative, much more talkative than normal. He's also not nervously pacing, which he usually does, or taking enthusiastic slugs from a plastic jug of moonshine. Normally, the fingers on one of his arms just twitch incessantly because he's got all this nerve damage from a machete attack. For some reason, everything is calm this morning, and it becomes clear to me after months of working with Chino and Jasmine that something has started to change. He's starting to contemplate a different kind of life for himself in Mexico, one that now seems to include Jasmine. He tells me, he says, "We might stay in Pakalna. Might stay here, get a job, rent a place to live." This catches me off guard completely, because just a few weeks earlier, he was running on the tops of a freight train, shit-faced, then talking to me about how he was going to drink bleach to end his life and escape his troubles. But now suddenly he is clear-headed and optimistic about the future. I listen in slight disbelief as he starts talking about normal employment. He puts his arm around Jasmine and she blushes and tries to cover up her smile. They're clearly smitten with each other. Love at first sight. And we sit there and we listen to the birds chirping and the clanging of train cars. I wonder if this is how they're going to get out. And suddenly now, Chiapas and the train tracks feel like a place of optimism. And at the time, I was with one of my collaborators, a director named Raul Paz Pastrana, who lives here in Denver, and who I'll probably get into trouble with later this week. We were filming a documentary, and so we were interviewing Chino, and I'm going to just show you. This is Raul asking Chino about his future and what he wants to do.
Por la primera vez que me vine para acá fue por amigos pues que lo dicen a uno, vamos allá, que está bien por acá y la planeta pues también está cabrón. Por todos lados. Como esto es un disparo y un machetazo con machete. Bravo, no quiere superar ya, ¿no? ¿Y ahora cuáles son tus planes para el futuro entonces? Tratar de conquistar el mundo, como dijimos nosotros. ¿Qué van a hacer con ya estabilizarme? No, está difícil, pues. Como anda en otro lugar, la verdad uno no puede decir qué es lo que va a suceder, sino que lo que Dios disponga, pues. Lo que Dios diga, eso es lo que va a suceder, porque no se sabe, pues. No se sabe.
So I'm going to end with this moment where we're having a going away party for me, and I can't decide if people are happy that I'm finally leaving, and so they're celebrating, or they're going to miss me. But I've been in Chiapas with these guys for several months now, and we're having a party on the train tracks, and we get to this moment where I'm going to skip ahead here because of time, where the party's kind of in full swing. Chino shows up and he tells me that something bad has happened, that his boss, Shadow, wanted him and Jesmond to leave with them and this group of women, that they were moving farther north. And Chino says to me, well, he was actually going to traffic these women. I found this out, and so I decided we weren't going to go with them, and I was going to run away with Jesmond, which then puts him in this very difficult position now. He's disobeyed a gang order, and now he's a marked man, and now people are coming after him and will try to harm him. And so he tells me, he says, I want to run away. Jesmond and I are going to try to find some new life away from this, but I don't know what to do. Do I run south? Do I run north? If we turn ourselves into detention, they're going to find me there. The gang world is, people know your name, and they can, and word can travel very quickly if you have disobeyed an order, and if you have people out there looking for you. So it's in this context that he and I were at this party and trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And he says, I really want to get away from this life. I want to run away and start over. And I said, okay, I don't know, but how can I help you? And he says, well, there's a church in Palenque, this archaeological town. Will you take me there and see if we can find shelter there? So this is this moment where we leave the party and we decide we're going to go to Palenque. The windows are rolled down to let the hot jungle air pass through the car. The sun starts to disappear to the west, and in the side mirror, I can see Jesmond's head leaning out the car window, her dark curly hair floating in the wind as she takes in the sights between Pacalna and Palenque. We look at all these signs advertising discount rates for hotels with swimming pools and Wi-Fi, signs for private tours of the nearby archaeological sites. An immigration van passes us. It's full of deportees, and they're looking at us through the window. And I wonder to myself, is it safer in there than it is out here on the streets? I contemplate my options for helping Chino. What do I do? Take him to my house? Drive him to some other town and rent him a room? But where? How far is far enough to get away from Shadow and his people? Or do I just shove money in his hand and say, you figure it out, dude? I don't know. We drive endlessly through the streets of Palenque looking for a place that will take him in. We finally get to the church. Chino knocks on the door and the priest is not there. They say, come back later and try again. And so defeated, we're like, what are we going to do? We start driving back through Palenque's Central Plaza. I can see couples the same age as Jesmond and Chino embracing under brilliant white gazebos. Children devour melting ice cream and chase pigeons across the square. An out-of-tune brass band stumbles through a song from a distant decade. Chino nudges Jesmond and he points as we drive by. And he says, I told you that Palenque was beautiful. Defeated, we start driving back to Pacalna, back to the train tracks and the fate that is waiting for these star-crossed lovers. And for the rest of my life, I will wish that I'd gone in the opposite direction and never taken my foot off the gas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We have time, just a brief moment of time for 2 questions. If someone would like to raise their hand who hasn't had a chance to speak with Jason yet today on his travels here at DU, myself and Elizabeth will get the mics to you.
Thank you, Jason. In your book, you talk a little bit about feeling some amount of guilt coming to university campuses to tell Chino's story. And I'm curious, if you're feeling that, what's your goal? Why are you here? And if you're not, I mean, what are you feeling now?
I go back and forth with, like when this book was done, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to do any more talks. And then part of me is like, well, you told these folks you're going to tell their story, and now you don't want to do it because you feel guilty about it. And I feel guilty about it all the time. I mean, the National Book Award, I'm there with like a bunch of famous people in tuxedos, and none of these guys are there. Nothing that's there is gonna change their lives radically, and yet here I am doing that. That really bothers me quite often. And I think now the way that I've gotten to it is sort of two things. It's one is that like I've made this promise that I was going to tell these stories, and so that's what I'm going to go do. And for me to get through the day is to be really open and honest about how it makes me feel when I do those things. But then, I really started to think about this more, feeling super demoralized about the state of the world, or like with my first book, when I would give talks about a 15-year-old kid that disappears in the desert, and every time I would talk about it, it was like ripping off this wound of like, here I am doing this thing that kills me inside, and I don't want to do it anymore, and I hate revisiting those places. But then I tell myself too, like, this is a privilege to be able to do those things, and I said I was going to go do those things, and if I don't go and say those things, I'm in a privileged position that someone has a microphone in front of me, and even though people walk out when they don't like what I have to say about certain things, most of the time people are there because they want to hear this stuff, and so I really try to take that privilege and honor very seriously, and go and do it whenever I'm asked to do it. But it definitely doesn't feel like there's no, like when this book was done, it wasn't like, oh yeah, man, like we did it. It was more like, it's done, and now we're gonna keep doing it for, how many more years of this am I gonna have to do this? The last book, I said, when it was finished, I told someone, I said, what, I'm really sick of this book. And he said, well, you'll only be talking about it for the next 10 years. And I thought he was joking. And I talked about that book for 10 years. And so I know that this is a kind of a long run, but at the same time, I think we need social science out in the world. We need people to tell these stories so that we can think about, I don't want to tell a story about migration or about borders. I want to tell stories about people who happen to be migrating, who happen to be crossing borders, but who, are humans. And so, but man, some days it's like, I just can't do it, or I don't want to do it. And then I have to like punch myself in the face or splash some water on my face and go, okay, here we go, we're doing it. And then be grateful for that opportunity to do it. Thank you for that question.
We've been given the green light that we actually have more than one more, so keep thinking about your questions.
Hi, thank you for writing this book. First of all, I thought it was beautiful and about something that I had never really thought that deeply about. So I appreciate you bringing these people's stories. I was just wondering if you're still in contact with any of these people that you wrote about, and how you manage to live your life every day and still like kind of remain like connected with these people if you do.
Smartphones and social media has made it to the point that you never get to leave the field, I think, anymore. I mean, my phone's off right now, but probably a message from Jasmine or Santos or these guys. So I'm in contact with a lot of these folks, and for me, the way that I think about it is, they were heavily invested in this project and having this project happen, and I really tried to give back as much as I can. I think for me, like, a difference between ethnographers and other folks is that like we're deeply committed to the communities that we work with far after a product is produced. And so both with my first book and with this book, I'm like attached at the hip to these folks forever. And that was a promise that I made, and as a commitment that I've made. And so it's kind of it's always there. And I'm grateful for that. But it's hard, to be constantly connected to folks and to feel helpless in a lot of ways. And I'm grateful to still be in conversation with them, and to I visit and always trying to think how can I be really helpful in different ways. But yeah, everyone in this book that's alive, I'm still in touch with. Well, actually, there's a guy that I call Flaco who has kind of disappeared, sadly. I don't know what's happened to him, whether he could be in jail, he could be dead. These things happen. He might resurface, which he occasionally would previously. And then there was one other person who, those of you who read the book, there's a moment where one of the guys that I worked with, who I loved dearly and was conflicted about a lot, this guy that I called Kingston, we get to a breaking point. You know, he like fake kidnaps himself, and he's like extorting me for money, and so we had to break up. He's the only person that I'm not really in contact with, because I mean, he was the one that was giving me kind of nightmares. But everybody else, I'm in touch with quite a bit.
Thank you for the way you ended that. I was like, it's like a novela. I was like, oh my God, do they make it? Had me on my edge of my seat. I'm a social worker, and I do ethnography, but I'm very community centered, and so I feel it when you say like you're deeply connected. Like there's no dipping in and out of these spaces, right? When we're deeply committed and there's a emotional connection. And the last piece you left us with, I kept thinking of moral injury, right? And how you are constantly being cut and struck by those moral injury in that way in both of your books, right? And both settings. One was at the border, right? And then this one was deep in the jungle. And I wonder what your process is for dealing with that, because it sounds like you have family in the US, and I wonder how that works. I know that sometimes we're like told, not to bring our stuff home, right? Our research. And also sometimes we're told, oh, it doesn't count because you're not objective, right? So yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I always, some of my friends in sociology, I feel for them because some of those folks are still under this impression that ethnography can somehow be wholly objective, right? And I'm like, you're working with humans, and there's subjectivity ramp. But that's okay. I mean, I think subjectivity, recognizing it, is powerful and helpful. For me, some of the most important parts of the book are when I mess up and things go wrong, and I write about that, and I want people to know what it looked like and what my concerns were. And so, yeah, this idea of like, is it truth? It's like, that's not even a question that I think about anymore. This is an experience. I'm representing this experience of other folks through my interaction with those folks, and so it's coming through multiple lenses, and just putting that up front, and then saying, now let's just move forward and keep that in mind. Is like there's no absolute truth in any of this stuff, but the other part of it, for me, and maybe this is like the subjectivity part, is I went into this book feeling like things are fine, like I'm totally okay, and I happen to write about young damaged men because I like hanging out with young people and drinking beer and doing stuff, and then by the time the book finished, it was like, oh, I'm hanging out with a bunch of like really fucked up people, and we get along so well because I am not well, and it came home, and it comes home in all kinds of different ways. And this book really forced me to, I went back to therapy after 30 some odd years. I finally had to admit that I was sexually abused as a child, and all the men that I was writing about were hinting about these things, but none of us could even articulate that. Like, we were too ashamed to even say it out loud. And so I came out of the end of this book being like, oh, this is what's going on. And these guys really taught me about empathy. They taught me about trying to find hope even in the most difficult kind of situations. And for me, I think I'm that, like, it's probably maybe like 6 weeks ago, I did an interview on Latino USA, and the first time that I'd ever said out loud to anyone other than my wife that I had been sexually abused as a child was on national public radio. Because I couldn't keep it in, and I was like, I'd been saying it at home, and I was like, I'm getting ready to say it, and I just need to get it out there because it has to come out. And these guys, I think, really, it came out not just for me, it came out for them, and it came out for a lot of these folks. And I feel like I didn't expect to write a book about smugglers and learn so much about my own trauma and about how to begin to heal myself. And so that's like the gift that they really gave to me, was forcing me to look at these things. And I think with my first book, I felt like I was just being damaged all the time by the trauma that I was being exposed to and trying to write about. With this one, I felt like it was happening again, except now it would happen, and then I would kind of reckon with it, and then I would talk to my therapist and try to build out of it. And
ethnography in a lot of ways, I think this thing saved me. And, I can come out and say I've struggled with depression my entire life, and yet I've never been able to say it out loud. Even though everyone around me, like when I say it to people, and they go, oh, that's what was going on, right? Oh, all these things. And I'm like, I wish I had known earlier, kind of things. And so that was really surprising. But I'm so grateful for it. And I think, my next project is this kind of trying to really engage with that, because we were talking about it at breakfast this morning. I do think that one of the problems we have in this country is toxic masculinity, is the brutality of patriarchy, and not just its impacts on the world in general, and especially on women, but also on men who can't even say that something is wrong, right? Like we're just emotionally closed off, and it is hurting everybody. And so for me, I did not expect this book to do that, but it really has, and I'm super, super grateful. Yeah, thank you for that question.
One final question.
I'm going to go on this road trip this summer to revisit a lot of people that I've been interested. We're part of. For me, I think that I gravitated towards ethnography because of this, because of my own sort of sadness. There's a bunch of things that got me to it, but I think part of it was just trying to connect with people on an emotional level. And so part of my summer is going to see these people who are random, not different parts of my life, and trying to figure out this journey from trauma to finding empathy, and what we sort of I don't know. It's just like every time I talk to my agent, and she's like, "You got to work on your elevator pitch here." But I'm like, "Look, I'm gonna drive around the United States. I'm gonna go knock on people's doors who haven't seen me in a long time, or maybe even never even thought that this interaction I had with them 30 years ago for one day impacted me so much. And I'm gonna come back and hopefully pitch you a book about trauma, ethnography, and I would hope empathy. But yeah, she's not totally sold on this yet, but I'm like, just give me give me a summer, and I'll come back and I'll pitch you something. So to be determined.
Well, thank you, Jason, for your truth, your commitment to storytelling and the stories of these individuals, and for just a very moving talk. This is exactly what the Harper Lecture is meant to do, to bring together our community to explore difficult issues, but in a way that we can move forward in the future. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.